How you doing? I'm Ken Bykoff, and welcome to O'Neill Speaks, the official podcast of the Paul H. O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University. For more than half a century, the O'Neill School has made a difference by leading for the greater good, and it is through the vision and expertise provided by both our world-renowned faculty and our partners that we've built a reputation as the premier school for public and environmental affairs in the country. Inspiring and educating the next generation of leaders sits at the core of the O'Neill School, and we're thrilled to have the opportunity to continue that mission by welcoming Brian Payne as our executive in residence. We're also excited to welcome Brian as our guest today on O'Neill Speaks. Brian is the former president and CEO of the Central Indiana Community Foundation and the Indianapolis Foundation. He is also the founder and founding artistic director of the Indianapolis Cultural Trail, a legacy of Gene and Marilyn Glick, as well as the founding board chair of the District Theater, which is committed to helping incubate a Black professional resident theater company for Indianapolis. He also currently sits on the boards of Visit Indy, Indiana Repertory Theater, and the 2024 NBA All-Star Game. Brian is a leader in the field of community development and philanthropy. With a track record of transformative initiatives and a deep commitment to making a positive impact for all, he has dedicated his career to fostering social innovation, urban revitalization, and inclusive growth. Brian, thanks so much for joining us.
Ken, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
So what made the O'Neill School appealing to you when you retired in June from CICF, and what made this want to be the next chapter in your career?
Yeah, thank you. A number of things. Usually it's always a number of things for me that kind of connect and inspire me. One is I got to know Dean Sean Mooney over the last 3 or 4 years and got inspired for her vision about how to continue to grow the impact of the O'Neill School in the state of Indiana and nationally and internationally. Both in Bloomington and in Indianapolis. I was very excited about that. I had fallen in love with Bloomington and this campus over the last 30 years. I moved from California. I'm a native Californian. I moved to Indianapolis 30 years ago, and there's something, well, everyone recognizes how powerful this place is. Like, what a beautiful, inspiring college campus. And I love college campuses, and this is definitely one of my favorite. And then, public policy, not-for-profit management, that's the field I've been working in all my life, if you count, arts management. And also my son is a very successful graduate of the O'Neill Schools in undergrad. He graduated with a major in public policy analysis in 2021, had an awesome time here, and is working for Congress, and couldn't be happier with his experience at the O'Neill School.
What initially drew you to public service and kind of the path that you followed?
My path was I wanted to be an actor, and I went to UCLA and did well as an undergraduate actor, got an agent. After a year, kind of recalibrated and thought, this is going to be a lot iffier than I had hoped, and went back and got my master's in theater producing and management. And then within 6 months was running Shakespeare Santa Cruz, a professional summer Shakespeare festival at the University of California in Santa Cruz. And what I learned early in running a theater company is to make a theater company work, you've got to convince people that company is more important to you, whether you buy a ticket and sit and watch a play or not, that it's important to the community, it's important for economic growth, it's important for education, it's important for self-development and the humanities and creating citizens that are thoughtful and knowledgeable. And in doing that, as the managing director, co-CEO, I kept putting myself out there in community leadership positions on boards and on task forces, to represent this creative force of a theater in a community. And what I discovered is I more and more started getting inspired by the act of actually just being involved in community leadership or civic leadership. So I kind of, my own values and priorities kind of changed, though my whole career I've still been on not-for-profit boards and founded a theater company as the founding board chair. So still love the theater, but this bigger idea of how do we all work together to make our communities or our state or our country better became my passion.
Specifically when it comes to the arts, investing in the arts and community development writ large, there typically is some pushback at some level of people saying, hey, why aren't we spending and investing in other social issues or ills that may be part of the community? How do you try to convince people that investing in the arts and community development is good in both the short and the long term?
That is always, you always have to do that, and frankly, how do you do it? In America, you always have to make the economic case. I mean, I could sit here and argue pretty well, I think, about the intrinsic value of the arts to our soul, to our quality of life, to the helping our kids become more thoughtful, more empathetic. And there's actually new science and new data on that that's very helpful for the arts. But ultimately in America, you want the arts to be supported financially. You have to make the economic case. And that is been easier to make over the last 20 years because even this, the state of Indiana recognizes, and the Indiana Chamber of Commerce, which has been generally a conservative organization representing Indiana businesses from throughout the state, they are now focused on how do we create a higher quality of life so we can attract and retain the talent that's coming out of Indiana University? How do we keep them in the state of Indiana? So there's actually much more interest in the arts as a quality of life, necessity, because people are understanding that culture creates a talent attraction pipeline and retention pipeline. And so it's getting easier, but you always have to make the economic case.
Because, with the Indianapolis Cultural Trail or the Beeline Trail here in Bloomington, where they repurposed old railroad tracks to a public path that gets a ton of use, there have been arguments, I know, along the way about why are we spending so much money to pave this over? What is this bringing? Why aren't we using that money for tax cuts? And to me, it is short-sighted to say, hey, let's divert those funds elsewhere when you have something that is more permanent and can really benefit so much of the populace as opposed to just a couple of dollars.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yes, and again, on the quality of life, the human connectivity, the the happiness factor.
Sure.
When you're walking on a trail and you pass someone, you smile more, you say hello more, you actually run into people Right. It is a great way to build human connection, community connection, both kind of emotionally, socially, as well as physically to get from place A to B. And certainly, if you believe in climate change and climate crisis like I do, well, you know what? Getting from A to B on a bicycle is one of the best climate-friendly ways, or walk or jog, but you can get farther on a bicycle. And you can actually, if we could get a much higher percentage of people riding bikes safely on trails like the Beeline Trail, Beeline, right? I've ridden on it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Or the Cultural Trail, the Monon in Indianapolis. And actually our state is doing a great job of trails. Governor Holcomb has done a beautiful job of leading some investments into trails. So we actually are very competitive as a state and our communities as far as trail connection. And that is a big quality of life enhancement and a big talent attraction piece.
And a great way to repurpose, especially old railroad lines that no longer exist. I think it's just a great job of using those, making those useful again.
And really, compared to a freeway mile, it is not even pennies on the dollar. It's tenths of pennies or hundreds of pennies on a dollar. And it really enhances human connectivity. And you know what? It creates jobs. The Cultural Trail downtown Indianapolis has created $3 or $4 billion of economic investment and development. And a lot of people moved to downtown Indianapolis and are living in apartments or condos or homes to be on the Cultural Trail.
And it's the kind of thing, too, that people visit a city and they think, I would like to live here because of having something like that. And then now you're attracting maybe some of the brightest minds, or convincing them to stay as well. I know I'm really hammering these trails thing, but I think that it's really important in terms of community development, of being able to really be an attractive aspect of an urban environment.
Yes, absolutely. It's one of the big passions of my life besides the cultural trail. We raised about $70 million over the last few years to focus in Indianapolis on equitable trail connectivity, building really high quality, again, the B&O trail, a conversion of the B&O railroad line that was abandoned. And when things get abandoned, it hurts the neighborhood.
Sure.
They become dumping grounds. And so we've reclaimed about 3 or 4 miles newly of the B&O trail that connects to an existing 7 or 8 miles. And already we're seeing that those neighborhoods improve. But yeah, one of my last big projects was to help raise in partnership $70 million for trails in central Indiana that connected Black and Latino neighborhoods to all the things that people need to have access to have a thriving quality of life.
How have you seen community development and philanthropy kind of change over the past 20 plus years? And how do you go about that differently, or how did you go about that differently in the past couple of years as opposed to when you started it?
Yeah, there is a huge change in philanthropy. I think we were ahead of it at the Central Indiana Community Foundation. We kind of, a little bit stumbled at the beginning. Stumbled in a good way into understanding the lack of upward mobility in America and in Indianapolis. And so as we went into a deep dive about how do we create a more, a fairer playing ground, then we learned just how big race. We knew race was an issue, of course, but really that the chances of upward mobility for a low-income Black person in America and in Indianapolis is so sickeningly low that we learned that we had to really, really, really devote ourselves to, creating a more equitable community in every field that affects human life, every sector. And so we were working on that. This idea that, actually, I learned that it's mostly a white culture perspective of the American dream. That was something my dad talked about a lot, is that if you work hard and delay gratification and do the right thing and are disciplined and, work hard at school and, that you can do anything. And that whole concept of the American dream really means that you can achieve higher than the economic class you were born in. Well, that really hasn't been that true for people of color. And so that's something that I devoted my life to the last 7 or 8 years. But philanthropy really didn't get it overall until George Floyd was murdered. And now what's happened with philanthropy is that there's this big focus on, hey, you know what? The people in the fancy offices, sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars of endowment or billions of dollars in endowment may not know the right answer in a Black neighborhood, may not know what a Latino neighborhood wants or what will work for them to enhance their quality of lives. So they're starting to get in relationship and actually bring people of color and more women and more people of color in leadership positions in philanthropy, because only they will have a real deep understanding of what needs to happen to help a Latino community or a Black community.
And it kind of highlights the real need for listening when it comes to people who are at the top levels of philanthropy.
Yeah, I think there's an examination of power dynamics that's very important. It's a very painful one. It's a very complex conversation. As human beings, it's not easy for us if we have power to want to give it up. And so I don't want to give up my power, but I do want to share it. I want to share it. I want to see a better Indiana. And how are we going to get to a better Indiana? Well, we're going to need to have people of color in shared power and having power. And if it's only people like me, a white guy that's only has power, we're not going to get there. Because even though I've learned a lot and I have deep relationships, authentic relationships with people of color now, and so I'm a much better leader than I was, but I still have my blind spots, and for sure. And if we want a Black neighborhood to thrive, we need Black people leading the way, making the decisions. And my job is to help come along and provide some resources that I might have access to or a perspective that might be helpful. I have a role to play, but it's not the leadership role.
What experience do you think that you have in your career that you can pass on in this executive in residence role to mentor the next generation of leaders?
I think there's a lot of lessons learned, things that, first of all, one of the things is I'm a big believer in the power of creativity. So I think we need to talk more about the role of creativity. And one of the ways that you get more creative is hanging out with creative people. So I would say that if, there's that whole, that old saying that I think it was Einstein, actually, and I'm going to mess it up a little bit, but, the creativity that we had when we created the problems that we have is not going to solve the problems. We have to be thinking new. We have to be thinking differently. So we have a lot of issues in this world. And, the O'Neill School students and other students on this campus that interact with O'Neill School programs, can play a big role. But they're going to need to be very creative. And there's a lot of lessons learned that I think I can, humbly impart. And by the way, I always feel like any kind of mentoring relationship is I learn at least as much as anyone else does from hanging out with younger people. That keeps me, active and relevant. So it's an exchange. It's a mutually beneficial exchange, and I'm very excited about. So I come here humbly as how do we mutually learn from each other? There's things that you, at a 22-year-old, you're native to digital everything. I was not. I'm going to learn a ton from you, and through 64 years and a career that's given me access to a lot of interesting projects and a lot of interesting outcomes, that I have things I can share with you. And I think we can both come out the better for it.
What's the best way for students who want to get involved in public service, community development, to get their foot in the door as they come up? Whether it is, and by students, I'm talking high school students, college students, graduate students. How do you get your foot in the door to kind of pursue that passion?
I think there's just showing up, like as a volunteer. Or let's say you're interested in the arts. Let's say you have an arts, that you might think, hey, I might want to do arts management, arts administration someday. Start showing up to performances, and when you're at a performance, start saying, hi to people, whether it's the usher or the, you can usually figure out if there's some kind of management person in the, in the audience, and usually there is at intermission. They're, trying to build community and introduce yourself. And by the way, someone in the arts sees a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old or a 22-year-old showing a lot of interest. They'll really extend themselves, because there is a very big concern that this generation isn't going to be ticket buyers to the arts because everything is on screens. And so if you have an interest, show up, volunteer. People need volunteers. And you might think, well, that volunteer thing wasn't all that exciting. Well, maybe the first 3 hours you volunteer, it isn't all that exciting. Maybe the first 3 weeks you volunteer. But if you can figure out how to navigate, you can make connections, you can say, hey, I'd like to take on some more responsibility. But, I always say, binging Netflix, nothing wrong with that. I'm in the middle of the show, The Offer, about the making of The Godfather, which I find incredibly compelling television. But, you're never going to get your next best job or your big break by watching TV at home.
Right.
Showing up in community and, showing up is really a huge part of it. Showing up as a volunteer, showing up as a patron of the arts, showing up at a community event. And then that'll help you figure out what you like about it, what you don't. You'll meet people that can direct you into the next phase of your exploration. Doing internships is a huge thing. Just asking, I've had people ask me if they could shadow me for a day, and I'm happy to do that.
Half the battle is just being there.
It's being there. It really is. I mean, it's like, and even when you get into positions of leadership, Like one of the ways that I have grown so much in the last 7 years is I've shown up in Black spaces and Latino spaces. Sometimes I'm the only white person in those spaces, and I was not comfortable the first few times I did that, but I've learned to be comfortable. And I have a lot of respect in a lot of parts of the Black community in Indianapolis and the Latino because they see me at their events and I engage. And so again, even when you have a career of leadership, it's still showing up. Where a mayor shows up, where a congressman shows up is meaningful, right? If you see a congressman and they never engage with the Black community, the Black community has no way to know that they're supportive.
Right.
Showing up is so important and so powerful.
Well, Brian, we're thrilled to have you as the O'Neill School's executive in residence, and we thank you for joining us on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Ken.
Well, that's all the time we have today on O'Neill Speaks. O'Neill Speaks is the official podcast of the Paul H. O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs. All opinions and comments on O'Neill Speaks belong to the host and the guest of O'Neill Speaks and doesn't necessarily reflect those of the school itself. Music for O'Neill Speaks is by Manos Mars. Be sure to subscribe to O'Neill Speaks on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcatcher app so you don't miss an episode. We're out of time, but for now, and for the O'Neill School, I'm Ken Bykoff saying thanks for listening, everybody.